All right, let's talk about Fallout Season 2, Episode 1. We're just hanging out, going through every single thing that happened, every little detail that made me pause and rewind, and all the wild theories that hit me while watching. Picture this. I just watched it, I've got my notes, and I'm just talking to you about it. Let's get into it. So, The Innovator. That's the title, and right from the jump, that tells you we're meeting the architect. This isn't Hank's episode. This is the introduction of the real puppet master, Robert Edwin House. But we'll get to him. First off, the cold open is insane. But before we even see House, the episode does this super meta thing. It opens like you're looking through a grainy, green-tinted screen, like the viewfinder of a Securitron robot. It's a wild choice that immediately makes you ask, whose eyes am I seeing through? Is it just a cool stylistic choice, or is it implying someone or something is reviewing this footage? It feels like a fourth wall break without actually breaking the wall, setting this eerie, observant tone from the very first second. Then we smash cut to the past. Pre-war Santa Monica Pier. It's all that perfect fake blue sky they have before everything goes to hell. There's a strike. Robco workers are smashing the very robots they built. And then he arrives. Mr. House. Justin Theroux plays him with this chilling, calm energy. He doesn't yell. He looks at these people like they're malfunctioning equipment. He gives this speech about obsolescence, how progress requires replacing the old. And he's not just talking about the robots. He's talking about the people. He views humanity itself as a system to be optimized. Then he demonstrates. He's got this little metal disc, a prototype. He slaps it on the neck of this union guy. There's a hiss, a click. The man's eyes go blank, completely empty. House hands him a baseball bat and says, very quietly, "Your colleagues are obsolete." And this poor guy with tears streaming down his face, but no control over his body, turns and beats his friends to death. It's one of the most horrifying things the show's done because it's so clinical. It's a demonstration. Afterward, House just says, "Terminate the prototype." The guy grabs his own head, and it pops. Not a big explosion, but a sickening internal burst. The chip destroys itself and takes the host with it. This is our first look at the neuroinvasive compliance chip, or as the show seems to call it, the brain-computer interface implant. This isn't just a weapon, it's the ultimate tool of control. It tells you exactly who Robert House is. He's not a cartoon villain, he's a visionary with zero morality, a genius who sees people as things. And get this specific piece of tech is a brilliant deep cut from the games, but not from House's story. In Fallout 3, there's a minor side quest involving a scientist called the Surgeon who experiments with brain control implants that can make heads explode. The show has taken this obscure bit of game lore and elevated it to a central plot device, putting it in the hands of its biggest villain. It's a great example of how the show builds on game canon without being shackled by it. That title card comes up, The Man Who Knew. Because he did. He knew the bombs were coming. The show is making it crystal clear. Robert House didn't just prepare for the Great War, he orchestrated it. To him, the apocalypse wasn't a tragedy. It was the next logical step. A scorched earth policy to clear the board for his new world order. Cut to the present, 2296, the Mojave Wasteland. And we're immediately in an iconic location from the games, Novac. The camera lingers on the broken "No Vacancy" sign. We see the Dino D-Light Motel and the giant dinosaur, Dinky the T-Rex. The scene is a masterpiece of tension and dark comedy. The Ghoul is strung up over an empty swimming pool by the Great Khans, another faction pulled straight from Fallout, New Vegas. He's dangling there, looking half dead. Where's Lucy? Her voice comes from inside the dinosaur's mouth. She's up in Dinky's jaws with a sniper rifle. The Khan leader is screaming up at her. "We had a deal. The Ghoul for supplies." Lucy shouts back, "That was Plan B. We're on Plan C now." Plan C is everyone walks away. The Khans just laugh. One of them grabs dog meat. "How about Plan D? We eat your dog and shoot you out of that dinosaur." You can feel Lucy's vault-born idealism smashing into the ugly, brutal reality of the wasteland. She's trying to negotiate. The wasteland doesn't do peaceful solutions. While this is happening, the Ghoul, barely conscious, mutters something. And if you listen closely on a broken speaker, you can hear Marty Robbins' Big Iron playing faintly. It's the perfect, darkly funny soundtrack for this whole messed up standoff, and a direct lift from the new Vegas radio stations. The ghoul spits in Akan's eye, chaos erupts, and the fight is set to the twang of Big Iron. Lucy is shooting to disable, knives out of hands, legs, she's still not killing. The ghoul has no such limits. The violence is brutal, short, and satisfying in that over-the-top Fallout way. It perfectly reestablishes their dynamic. She's trying to hold on to her soul in a world that sold its soul centuries ago. Afterward, they stand at the edge of town. The ghoul points northwest. There, glowing on the horizon, is the strip of New Vegas. It's lit up like a diamond in the dirt. Lucy, in awe, asks how it survived. The ghoul's voice is full of 2 centuries of bitterness. Everyone thinks it was them. Some government bunker, some army. There was no them. There was a him, one man, Robert House. And just like that, the monster from the bar is connected to the Shining City, the ghost in the machine. This moment is huge for a theory that's been brewing since Season 1. The ghoul clearly has history with House. Later flashbacks confirm it. Moldaver specifically asked Cooper to get close to House and kill him before he could press the button. He didn't do it, or he couldn't. So think about the weight the ghoul carries. For 200 years, he's believed he had the chance to stop the apocalypse and failed. That's not just bitterness. That's a bottomless well of guilt and rage. Every time he mentions House, that's what's simmering underneath. Now let's go underground. The vault stuff in this episode is a mix of existential dread and the show's signature dark humor. Vault 33 is in trouble. Overseer Betty Pearson is staring at a terminal. The primary water chip is failing. They're on backups. For game fans, that term's water chip is a lightning bolt. That's the entire plot of the very first Fallout game. It's a brilliant deep-cut reference that also sets up a real crisis. This isn't a minor problem, it's what could doom the vault. It's also the ticking clock that might finally force these insulated people to the surface. Meanwhile, in the cafeteria, poor Reg McPhee has put up a sign for a support group. Inbreeding, you are not alone. He means it as a group to talk about the problems of their limited gene pool, but the vault dwellers don't read it that way. They file in and a woman raises her hand. So, are we here to talk about avoiding inbreeding or finding suitable partners within the approved genetic lines? Reggie's face just falls. He created a support group for trauma. They thought it was a matchmaking service. It's a hilarious, deeply sad joke that nails the insulated, messed up logic of Vault society. Over in Vault 32, Stephanie is the new overseer. She's trying to be tough, but you can tell she's in over her head. Her scenes with Chet are painfully awkward. They were basically an arranged marriage from the Vault reshuffling, and now they're stuck co-parenting. It's a great, subtle way to show the human fallout of the Vault experiments. It's not just about survival, it's about these forced, messed up relationships that no one signed up for. But the big Vault moment, the real game changer, is in Vault 31. Norm is still trapped with Bud Askins, the Vault tech executive who's just a brain in a jar with a robotic arm. Bud is lecturing him, being all smarmy and corporate. You need to learn your place, Norman. Perhaps a period of reflection, in cryo. The arm starts forcing Norm toward an open cryopod. Norm panics, struggles, kicks over a terminal. In the scuffle, he sees the main console. Rows and rows of pods, each with a frozen, sleeping Vault tech exec from before the war. The original architects of the apocalypse, preserved. Norm doesn't just fight to escape. He makes a decision. He lunges for the console and initiates an emergency thaw, all units. Alarms blare, lights flash red. All across the chamber, pods hiss. Frost melts on the glass. Inside, eyelids twitch. Norm has just unleashed an army of the most amoral, power-hungry bureaucrats from the old world. Let's stop and theorize right here, because this is massive. Norm hasn't just freed himself. He's declared war on the entire Vault tech system. Think about what he's unleashed. These aren't soldiers. They're middle managers, executives, the paper pushers of doom. They're going to wake up and want their power back. They'll have their own agendas, their own rivalries with each other, and with Hank. Norm might have accidentally created a terrifying third faction in the coming war for the Mojave, a corporate zombie horde from the past, hungry to reclaim their surface-level projects. The chaos this causes is going to ripple through the entire season. Back on the surface, Lucy and the ghoul are traveling. Their banter is perfect. She's cleaning her gun, trying to stay principled. He's chewing on some dubious wasteland meat and mocking her. You keep waiting for the world to play fair, princess. It died before you were born. They're the odd couple of the apocalypse, and their chemistry is still the show's beating heart. They come over a hill and find the Starlight Drive-In, another direct pull from Fallout 4. The big screen is collapsed, the cars are rusted husks. They're scavenging for clues about Hank. The ghoul pokes a skeleton in a car. Date night, he grunts. Lucy finds the marquee, the last movie shown, A Man and His Dog 3, starring Cooper Howard. She looks back at the ghoul. He's deliberately not looking. It's a tiny, quiet moment where his past as a movie star, as a real human with a family, pierces through his hardened ghoul exterior. It's a ghost haunting him. Behind the screen, they find a hidden hatch, the entrance to Vault 24. Now, here's a deep, deep cut for the hardcore fans. Vault 24 was a vault that was planned for Fallout, New Vegas, but was completely cut from the final game. The only thing left in the game's files was a jumpsuit. The show is literally resurrecting lost game lore. That's how dedicated they are to the details. When they descend, the vibe is all wrong. It's cold, silent. The usual Vault Tech yellow is mixed with red stars and hammer and sickle stencils on the walls. They find the overseer's office, a skeleton at the desk wearing a ushanka, a Russian fur hat. Lucy pulls a log from the terminal. The experiment was called the Re-Education Initiative. The premise? Take American capitalists and use the neck chips to brainwash them into perfect communists. It was an experiment in ideological warfare. This is where the episode brilliantly ties the past and present together. The chip tech in Vault 24 is the same tech House was demoing in the bar. This vault was one of the speed bumps Hank mentioned in his final message, a test site that failed. But it confirms a terrifying theory about the pre-war world. The commie threat wasn't just an external enemy. Corporations like Vault-Tec and Robco were creating simulated enemies underground, turning Americans into puppets to study control. It reframes everything. The war wasn't just about resources, it was the final, violent experiment by people who saw the entire human race as their lab. They go deeper. In the main chamber, a ghoul with a fresh neck chip stands up, jerky. Lucy, her voice trembling, says, "Dad?" Hank's voice comes out, flat and recorded. "Lucy, my sweet girl, you are remarkably persistent, and you are in over your head. Turn back. Go home to your vault. This path only leads to oblivion. Do not follow me." The message ends. The ghoul stands there for a second, then it brings its hands to its temples. The ghoul yells, "Get down!" Pop, a wet, internal burst. The controlled ghoul's head implodes, just like House's test subject. Hank's warning was also a demonstration. He's showing her the absolute ruthlessness of the power he's working with. He's saying, "I am with people who think popping heads is a standard security procedure." The final scene takes us to where Hank actually is. It's not a vault. It's a massive, clean Vault-Tec underground facility, pristine and humming with power. Hank walks to a decontamination shower, strips off his wasteland gear, and washes off the grime of the Mojave. He goes to a locker, inside a crisp, modern gray suit. He puts it on, knots the tie perfectly. He looks like a corporate executive again. He's home. He sits at a terminal and opens a comms link. The screen stays dark. A voice comes through. Calm, cultured, cold. Robert House. "Report," House says. Hank takes a breath. The Vault 24 field test is complete. The compliance architecture is stable, but the termination subroutine remains explosively volatile. "We have containment." House's voice is dismissive. "Volatility is a design feature. It ensures silence." "Your progress on the core directive?" Hank explains they've made progress on the brain-computer interface and miniaturization in different vaults, but it all needs integrating. Then he says the line that defines his entire character. "I'm going to complete the work you started, and when this is all over, you will be begging me to help you." Let's unpack this, because Hank's entire motivation is laid bare here. He's not a prisoner. He's a willing, eager participant, a true believer. But he's also a sycophant. He's doing all this, betraying his vault, abandoning his daughter, perfecting a technology of ultimate control for a promotion. He wants House to beg to hire him. It's the most petty corporate evil imaginable. He's the ultimate company man, and the company is the apocalypse itself. This sets up my biggest theory for the season. Hank sees himself as House's indispensable right hand, but House's entire philosophy is based on obsolescence. Tools get replaced. Hank, in his desperate climb, is making himself the perfect tool. What's the most ironic, poetic end for a man perfecting a mind control chip? If House, to test the final product, uses it on him, the loyal lackey becomes the ultimate puppet. Hank's quest for a promotion could end with him losing his free will entirely. And what about House himself? We hear his voice, but is he even alive? The talk of obsolescence, the digital tone. I'm convinced the biological Robert House is gone. His consciousness has been uploaded into the mainframe of the Lucky 38 casino or a network of Securitrons. The man Lucy and the Ghoul will meet is a projection. An AI wearing his face and voice. That's how he's survived for 200 years. The episode ends with a chilling, silent coda. No explanation, just annihilation. Someone is clearing the board, and it's not an army, it's one man in a tower pressing a button, deleting anything he finds inconvenient or obsolete. It's House, actively sculpting the wasteland to his design. So that's The Innovator. It's not an episode about action, it's an episode about power. It shifts the chessboard, introduces the king, and shows us all the pawns. Lucy and the Ghoul are chasing a father, but that chase is now part of a war for the soul of the Mojave. Norm has unleashed a plague of managers from the past. Hank is trying to buy his way into hell. The villain isn't a monster in the shadows. He's the man who built the room, turned out the lights, and is now patiently waiting for everyone to fall in line. The stage is set, the pieces are moving, and it's already messier than a bowl of flea soup. What do you think? Is Hank destined to get chipped? Is House already an AI? What will those thawed Vault-Tec execs do first? The theories are half the fun. Let me know yours.